heart, fire in his eyes. May it burn away the trust and lay bare the lies. Fill mine with fire, the same fire that's in your eyes. I'm riveted by your glow and the burning that's light.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Refining Exegetics, a podcast and biblical studies channel which aims to inspire life-changing interpretations of the Bible and our stories through unique explorations of modern biblical scholarship and ancient wisdom. I'm your host, Jared Casperi, and welcome to tonight's live stream. This is going to be part 2 of my presentation on what I present as the biblical model of atonement, called priestly purification, and in contrast, and what I hope is a definitive challenge and refutation of the penal substitution framework and how it reads these the relevant scriptures. So again, welcome. Let me know in the chat if you're there in the chat if you can hear me all good. If I need to raise or lower my volume. With that said, let's continue on from part 1. So centuries of inherited frameworks have taught us to confirm the Bible rather than hear it. And most of us have never been shown the difference. This is the place where we learn to actually listen. Most of us were handed Isaiah 53 already interpreted. We were given the conclusions through a systematic theology before we ever read the text. The suffering servant as a legal stand-in, observing a penalty on our behalf, satisfying a divine requirement that demanded punishment. And because the framework arrived first, we interpreted the text inside it. The words seemed to confirm what we already believed. But the text resists this kind of handling. When you actually follow the arc of Isaiah 53, from its opening lines to its close, when you let it build the way the prophet built it, what you encounter is not a courtroom, it is a martyrdom. And the figure at the center is not a defendant absorbing punishment in place of others. He is a priest, anointed and sent, who enters into the suffering his people's rebellion has created, lifts their weight before God, and is vindicated, raised up, exalted, given offspring and length of days, on the other side of it. This matters far beyond a theological debate, because the question of who the servant is and what he is doing is also the question of what his people are called to do. The apostolic writers read Isaiah 53 as the pattern of a life, a way of moving through the world in faithfulness, absorbing injustice without retaliating, trusting the Father's vindicating rather than grasping for your own. That is not the pattern of penal transaction. It is a pattern of a forerunner, and it is the pattern we are called to imitate. The Passover carries the same stakes. The story most of us were told is that the lamb died in place of Israel's firstborn sons, that the blood on the doorpost was a signal that judgment had already fallen on a substitute, and that God's wrath could pass over because the penalty had been paid. It's a coherent story. It is also not what Exodus says. The destroyer was sent against Egypt. Israel was never in the path of that judgment. The Passover is not a story about escaping a sentence. It's a story about God who acts as the kinsman redeemer of his people, who claims them, marks them as his own, and sits down to eat with them at the table of deliverance. And that distinction is not minor. A God who requires a penalty to be paid before he can love you is a different God from the one who comes to rescue you because you belong to him. The gospel changes shape depending on which story you are living inside. So, want to go ahead and jump into this presentation. I hope that you will stick around, because after I'm done with the presentation, there will be opportunity to join. And I'll bring you up, and we can have a discussion, whether you agree or disagree with whatever I'm going to present. I hope that there will be those who actually will disagree, and that's totally fine. And I'd be happy to have a cordial discussion and talk through those things. So, with that said, let's bring up our presentation. So again, the what I'm presenting in terms of atonement is called purification by life, or you call it as priestly purification and atonement. And this is a biblical theology against penal substitution. And so we've already gone through part one. I've covered a lot of information, but right now we're going to dive right into Isaiah 53. So the full song is actually the fourth servant song in Isaiah actually goes from 52 verse 13 to 53 verse 12. And this is the fourth servant song. It's a passage most frequently cited in support of penal substitutionary atonement. I want to work through it carefully, section by section, because I believe a rigorous exegesis of this text actually dismantles PSA rather than supporting it. The song is a poetic construction of 5 stanzas with 3 verses each. Roughly, that's roughly the breakdown there. The prologue, 52:13 through 15, introduces the controlling themes of the whole passage. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be presenting sort of follows Peter Gentry's analysis of the prologue pretty closely. I follow that, though I depart from his distinctly PSA conclusions. Sometimes he draws some, because again, he, like a lot of us, this is sort of the framework that we're given, or that we initially come to this text with, is this framework of penal substitution. And as much as we can look at the data and do a careful exegesis of the text, sometimes that lens can color the conclusions that we arrive at from the data, or might even direct us in coming to even looking at the data incorrectly. So, prologue opens with, "Behold, my servant shall act wisely." That's verse 13. And this verb, acts wisely, is a deliberate allusion to the wisdom tradition. Why do I say that? Well, so there is a wisdom tradition within Judaism and within early Jewish literature that, and we may even have opportunity to talk about this a little bit if we talk about in chapters 2 and 3. There's a lot of tie-in to Isaiah 53 in wisdom literature. You even see this in Proverbs, in some of the Psalms, where somebody acting wisely and heeding instruction will come into situations of affliction, and the people who are not wise, foolish, will look upon this righteous person who's acting wisely and will actually seek to persecute him. Well, we see that a lot in the Gospels, don't we? We see the people, the Jewish leaders, seeking to trap him, seeking to give false accusation against him, uh, and because they want to think that God is against him and that they're doing the work of God by afflicting him, by persecuting him, and then turning around and saying, "See, God is striking you," even though we're the ones that are striking you. And so that's the interplay there that's going on. But this whole picture and that this motif that runs through the entire suffering servant song is one of lowly condition, affliction, and yet through wisdom he will be exalted. He submits to the humble state, but understands that God uh, lifts up and exalts the humble and brings down the proud. So, for example, which that government high and exalted. Reason is Well, I'm sorry, folks. I'm having some technical difficulties here. The stream has I was kicked out of the stream and trying to get things worked back out. Let me know if you can hear me now. I know things were sort of glitching out pretty bad. I might have to forego having my camera on. Yeah, let me know in the chat if you guys are still there. Yeah, again, I apologize. I don't know how much of this is making it into the live stream or not. I've had some technical difficulties on my end. A storm has come in and is wreaking havoc on my network signal. So I apologize, folks. I'm not sure if this is going to work tonight or not. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Again, yeah, I apologize. Let's see. Let me see if I can smooth things over a little bit. Okay, well, there's probably going to be a bit of a delay or lag time. Again, I apologize, folks. I don't know what's going on. This usually goes smoothly. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit and see if we can get going again. So, just a quick recap. We are diving into Isaiah 53 and looking at it from an exegetical standpoint from the original language. We're going to be primarily focused on the Hebrew text. Wow, I'm still breaking up. Hmm. All right. Just going to see if I did turn some things off. So hopefully that clears up some bandwidth and we can move forward. I'll keep checking the chat to see if anything is better or worse. All right. So the servant is described as high and lifted up and exalted, and the reason for his exaltation is introduced immediately. Though many are appalled at his appearance, God is working through his suffering to exalt him. The structure of 52:14 through 15 is significant. Gentry, who I mentioned earlier, whose commentary I follow pretty closely here, identifies the clausal construction as mirroring Exodus 1:12. In Exodus 1:12, it's kind of juxtaposing the oppression of Israel by Pharaoh and Egypt, juxtaposing that with the fact that even under that, even so, they increased and multiplied. And so we have this phraseology of just as they mistreated them, so they increased and so they spread. This is quite a bit like what 52:14 through 15 is constructed as. Just as Egypt's oppression could not prevent Israel's multiplication and growth, so the servant's humiliation does not prevent, indeed, is the very occasion for his anointing and exaltation. The word in 52:14b, typically translated as marred, is on Gentry's reading better rendered anointing. That Hebrew word is mishkath. And the verb in 52:15a, often translated as startle, is more accurately rendered sprinkle. And Gentry gives some pretty convincing arguments to that effect. So the very action of the high priest who sprinkles the blood in the holy place is what the servant is doing to the nations. The servant, in other words, is being introduced as the anointed high priest who will sprinkle many nations. This sets up everything that follows. The servant is not a penal substitute. He is the high priest, anointed above all others, commissioned to perform the ultimate purification rite. The second stanza, 50:1 through 3, describes, let's see, I think I might need to advance the slide here. Well, let's keep going. So the third stanza provides the theological interpretation of that suffering. Verse 4 introduces the verbs nasa, that is to lift up, carry, and sabal, to bear as a weight. The context of the high priestly ministry, as depicted throughout Leviticus and Numbers, nasa is the word used when the high priest lifts up the iniquities of the people before the Lord in intercession in order to remove them. This is, let's see, I might need to, let's see, let me pull something up here real quick. Bear with me, folks. I'm going to bring up something. So, when Isaiah 53:4 says, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows," and even some translations are, the idea is bearing sins and iniquities, which is something that comes up later. We read this bear language, and within the penal substitution framework that we're often handed, that we're sort of raised in, this bearing language immediately conjures up an idea of being punished for sins. You're bearing the penalty or bearing the punishment, and that's just not the case, because, like I said, there's a lot of priestly motifs going on in the suffering servant song, and within that priestly context, in, like I said, Leviticus and Numbers, that verb nasa, bear, to lift up, carry, is intimately connected to the actions of a high priest who carries iniquities before the Lord to remove them. It's fundamentally an act of intercession, and the result of that bearing is that the iniquities, the transgressions, and whatever he's bearing is removed. And the high priest is uniquely sanctified and set apart in order to do that function. This is not a literal transference of guilt to the priest. There is no concept of imputation present in this verb. The high priest carries the burden of the people's iniquities before God. He intercedes so that God will cleanse them away. The relevant word for imputation would be chasab, to reckon, to account, and it appears nowhere in this song. To read imputation into nasa is simply to import a concept the text does not use. Matthew's gospel actually clarifies this for us, this verse 4. In Matthew 8:17, after describing Jesus healing the sick and casting out demons, Matthew quotes Isaiah 53:4 as being fulfilled in those acts of healing. He bore our infirmities, and carried our diseases. The sense Matthew gives to nasa is carried away, removed, not had them transferred to him and was punished for them. When Isaiah says the servant bore our griefs, the meaning is that he carried them away from us, removed them by the power of his life and ministry. Verse 4 also includes what I considered a crucial contrasting clause. Again, what's reiterated, the motif that's reiterated throughout the suffering servant song, is the contrast between how the people perceived the servant and what was actually going on with the servant. The people thought the servant was being smitten by God and afflicted. This is the second half of that. Though surely the servant was carrying their griefs, bearing and lifting up their sorrows. And again, in the context of how the New Testament itself interprets this phrase, it's talking about removing and is healing. Even though he was doing that, we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. So this is a direct statement that their perception was wrong. It's that yet that's an adversative, a contrastive. The rhetorical flow of the entire song has been setting up this contrast: how things appear versus how things actually are. The people see divine punishment. God sees the exaltation of his priest. And like I mentioned before in the opening, wisdom of Solomon and other wisdom literature in Jewish tradition comes into play. When we read Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 3, 1-9, it describes where the suffering of the righteous looks like punishment to observers, but is actually God's testing and perfecting of those who belong to him. The apostles inhabited this same interpreter tradition. And it is this tradition, not PSA, that governs their reading of the cross. So verse 5, this is the linchpin for PSA readings. So I want to spend some time here. And I did cover some of this near the tail end of part 1 when I'm dealing with the Hebrew preposition mean in this chapter. We're going to deal with it a bit more here. There are so many commentaries and commentators and videos and teachings on Isaiah 53 that when they get to this verse, if they don't already have a penal substitutionary reading, or they're seeking to read Isaiah 53:5 in some way other than PSA, what they usually do is just grant the English translation and then just try to say, well, we could read it this way and not a PSA way. I am not going to take that approach here. I'm going to go straight to the Hebrew text and do something that I haven't really seen much of anybody, even scholarly commentaries, do. that they totally gloss over. Let's see. Yeah, sorry. Got distracted there for a second. And I'm going, what I'm going to do is actually give you the Hebrew text and actually read it the way it's supposed to be read. I'll just put it that way. And this will make sense when I talk about it. So all English translations, apart from those who maybe are based off of the LXX, which has a slightly renders slightly a different reading, and we'll comment on that later. Most English translations have "He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities." As I discussed in the earlier section, let's see. So the Hebrew preposition "mean," as I said in part 1, that's that preposition means out of. It means source or origin or cause. It's generally rendered from or out of in pretty much all through the Hebrew scriptures, except for Isaiah 53 for some reason. I think I have an idea of what that reason is, but I'll just table that for a second. And so this is the preposition that features in the traditional Jewish blessing prayer for the bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Min haaretz is that last line. That's from or out of the earth. Blessed is Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread out of the earth. And mean, fundamentally, the special relation there is something is coming out of or originating out of something else. And that's the spatial relation that is mean. So whatever the noun that mean is governing in that prepositional phrase, that noun is the cause or what the primary verb is coming out of. So in this passage, it should actually be read as he was wounded from or out of our transgressions, he was crushed or bruised out of or from our iniquities. And like I said, in virtually every other context in the Hebrew scriptures, mean is rendered this way as out of or from. But in Isaiah 53:5, the English translations almost universally render it as for. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. This rendering quite naturally suggests a purposive or substitutionary relationship in English vernacular. He suffered for our sins instead of suffering for his own sins. Kind of that's what we're sort of prying by this for language. Or he was pierced instead of us because of our transgressions or something of that nature. But again, this is not what the preposition mean communicates. Mean answers the question, what caused this, not what purpose did this serve? So again, that's critical, because if you read for as purposive, there was a purpose, he was wounded, and that purpose was for our transgressions. Our transgressions deserve something, and that something was being wounded and pierced and bruised and crushed. And that happened to the servant for the purpose of the transgressions. That's how the preposition for primes us to think. And it's hard to get out of that mindset. What I hope to do is to break you of that mindset right now by bringing you back to the Hebrew text. Mean does not mean for. It is not a purposive preposition in Hebrew. It never gets rendered that way anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. And there's no reason at all to render it as for in this passage. So you just need to I'm sorry to say, folks, but you just need to strike for out of your English translation. You need to cross it out and you need to put from or out of, or even by would work too. But that's just what you have to do. I ran this by Hebrew grammarians and have pressed them on this, and they agree. I mean, there is no reason to render this as for. So a simple analogy can make this clear. Like I say, and I'm reiterating some of this, but this is important. I want to tie all this together. In an analogy, would say you have an industrial working environment, and you have some workers, and they're doing some work on big machinery. If I say he was injured from their negligence, let's say like you have a coworker who goes into a dangerous area, and there's other coworkers who have neglected to implement safety measures, and because of that negligence, one of the crew members gets severely injured by a piece of machinery that was supposed to be disconnected from power at a certain time, and it wasn't, and he got severely injured. We could say that he was injured from their negligence. From their negligence. We wouldn't say he was injured for their negligence. It wasn't the purpose of his injuring was their negligence. No, the cause of his injury was their negligence. The injury came out of their negligence. That's literally what mean is denoting. And the Hebrew would use the preposition mean to communicate that. In English, we might also say he was injured by their negligence. What we would not say is he was injured by the manager for their negligence, as if some purposive legal mechanism were at work. So like I said, the correct rendering would be he was pierced from our transgressions. He was wounded from our iniquities. That is, our transgressions and iniquities were what caused his suffering. This is entirely consistent with the flow of the chapter. The people turned away and went their own way, and their rebellion brought its violence and oppression down upon the servant who was trying to intercede for them. So let's come back to let's come back here. So again, we're moving on. We're in verse 5. Our transgressions caused his piercing. Our iniquities brought about his crushing. This is entirely consistent with everything the song has said up to this point. The people's rebellion and waywardness is precisely what turned against the servant. When they finally encountered the righteous one who was interceding for them, they rejected him and handed him over to be destroyed. The verb daka, which also appears in verse 5, it gets rendered in English translations as crushed or bruised. It has its own semantic field that does not naturally extend to penal substitution. In Isaiah 57:15, the same root, daka, describes the contrite spirit. God dwells with the one of a contrite and lowly spirit to revive them. In Psalm 34:18, the Lord saves the crushed, daka, in spirit. So notice that daka is speaking of a state of humbleness, of contriteness, of being lowly. So and what's distinguished about this is that these passages speak of God drawing near and saving this one. So we should really have in mind, and Isaiah is making this clear later on. I mean, this is still Isaiah talking when he says that God dwells with the one of contrite and lowly spirit. When we read that the servant is crushed or daka, brought low, humbled by their iniquities, we need to understand that that this is signaling somebody who is brought low due to wickedness and afflictions of people, and God draws near and he will save him. That's literally what should be in our minds when we read verse 5. Continuing on, in Proverbs 22:22, the phrase to, quote, crush the afflicted, that's the same word, daka, is paralleled with robbing the poor. It is the language of oppression and humiliation, not of penally sanctioned punishment. In this context, the servant being, quote, crushed refers to his being humiliated and brought low through the violence and oppression of the wicked, the very dynamic introduced in the prologue. Go figure. And let me know in the chat if everything's still good, if you're still there. By the way, if you're listening into this and let me know in the chat. Submit your questions. If you got questions about things, if you want something specific that you want me to address that I am not addressing here, some questions you have, put them in the chat, and I'd be happy to address them as we move along. So there is also no connection anywhere in the Torah between, quote, crushing and piercing and the divinely appointed penalty for sin. The penal prescriptions of the law never describe crushing or piercing as punishments. So the claim that these verbs describe a, quote, penal substitute bearing the just punishment for sin, it has no exegetical ground to stand on. The language of punishment in the law looks entirely different. Now, the second half of verse 5, upon him was the chastisement. In English translations, you have everything from chastisement to punishment to discipline. That Hebrew word is musar. The word musar is, as I said at the outset, the key word in the wisdom tradition for instruction. I mentioned this in the when we were talking about the prologue. It said, "My servant will be wise." Let's see. So yes, this is the word musar that's prominently in the wisdom tradition for instruction, correction, and discipline. It is the disciplining of a son by a father who loves him. The Aramaic Targum's rendering of Isaiah 53:5, lines 3 and 4, is instructive here. The Aramaic Targum, like for instance, Targum Jonathan on Isaiah 53:5 says, quote, by his teaching shall his peace be multiplied upon us, and by our devotion to his words, our transgressions shall be forgiven us. So notice that the Targum, the Aramaic Targum, renders the Hebrew with the Targumic, or with the Aramaic word for teaching, instruction. That's important because the editor knows what Hebrew Masar means in the context of wisdom literature, in the context of Isaiah 53. He understands that this is talking about instruction, wise instruction, teaching, and adds the further note that it's the Aramaic, I believe, is taking the Hebrew with his wounds we are healed, that last line of Isaiah 53:5. And I believe he's understanding that as with his wounds, like in unity with his wounds, we are healed. So in the Aramaic poetic mind, frame of mind that's at play here, he's understanding that the servant is going through something that brings vindication to the servant, that justifies the servant, and we too are to follow in those steps. he's manifesting the instruction, the discipline of God that brings forth peace. And we're meant to be obedient to that teaching, following his footsteps, and therefore our transgression shall be forgiven us. That's really the headspace of the Aramaic Targum, and it's very insightful when we're actually trying to figure out what the Hebrew, the underlying Hebrew of the text is saying. Folks, this is not punishment. This is not legal transaction punishment penalty language. Not at all. It's nowhere at all in the frame of reference for that Isaiah is speaking within. Musar is speaking of instruction of a father to a son to bring up the son. The LXX is instructive too in this verse because it uses the noun, renders musar with the noun of discipline in Greek, the very noun that is used in reference to fathers raising up and instructing their sons into maturity. So that would bring us to look at a passage like Hebrews 12. If we read from verse 4, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. So notice, who are we talking about here? Whose example is the author of Hebrews just now talking about? Well, he's talking about Jesus, the forerunner and perfecter of our faith, who we're to fix our eyes on, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Here we have enduring cross suffering at the hands of wicked, scorning its shame, going through that, not reviling, and being faithful to God, and then being exalted to sit down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. That's just before he starts talking about how we are to live in imitation of that. He says, in quoting, I think this is, what is this, Proverbs 4:26, I think, that he quotes. He says, my son, do not take lightly the discipline of the Lord, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastises every son he receives. Actually, I'm sorry, that's Proverbs 3. So discipline here, that's the word that is in the Septuagint for Isaiah 53:5 that renders the Hebrew musar. So if you're disciplined, that shows that you are a son. Verse 7 in Hebrews 12 says, endure suffering as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you do not experience discipline like everyone else, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. And then he goes on to say, no discipline seems enjoyable at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it yields a harvest of righteousness and peace. Wow. To those who have been trained by it. So here we have the fruit of this discipline is peace. This sounds exactly like what Isaiah 53 is communicating. So knowing this and knowing these verbal equivalencies and the stark similarities in the context here about suffering being discipline, we should understand we should not think in our minds of musar, discipline, in the sense of punitive penalty, punishment, him receiving the punishment that was due us, and that brings peace. No, that's just not at all going on here. You can't get that from the Hebrew text, and that's why I'm presenting the Hebrew and the Greek to you. This is so important because think about this, what's at stake here. If you read it in the traditional PSA reading, then you don't have to submit to God's discipline. Well, Jesus did it for you. He did it in your place, so you don't have to go through that. Now he's the one who's lived righteously, and you don't have to. He did it for you in your place. That think about mentally and spiritually, emotionally, what that does you. It does not engender a view of, oh, I should walk wisely. But think about it instead in terms of the servant in the midst of afflictions and wickedness, when he walks out in perfect obedience to God, heeding that instruction, walking wisely, being afflicted by the persecution and the violence of wicked men, and then God vindicates him. Think about what that does. It's like, oh, it wakes you up to realize, it wakes the people who had done this to the servant, it wakes them up to realize, wow, we have gone so far astray. We've turned our own way. We haven't heeded the way of God, and this servant has just displayed the way of God perfectly before us, and we were a party to his humiliation and his crushing. And we need to wake up. And that's exactly what Isaiah 53 is meant to do. That's why the people, when Peter preached the first gospel on the day of Pentecost to the crowds of Jews from all different places, they were pierced to the heart. They realized, wow, we have gone so far astray. What did we do to be saved? So that's exactly what's going on there. All right. So let's continue on. So another passage in Hebrews that bears upon this is Hebrews 5:7-10. This is the apostolic commentary on this very dynamic that we've been talking about. It says, quote, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. End quote. So the Musar on the servant is not the father punishing the son in our place. It is the father's instrument for perfecting the son through suffering. The same instrument the author of Hebrews invites his audience to embrace in chapter 12 when he quotes Proverbs 3:11-12 about the Lord's discipline of those he loves. There is simply no penal substitution framework here. So verse 6 concludes the stanza with the corporate confession, quote, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Again, I'm reading the ESV there. The verb at the end, paga, which is in the hyphal stem here, is the same verb used in 53:12, where it is correctly translated made intercession for. The verb literally, paga, is to interpose, to be between. So the Lord caused his servant to make intercession for the iniquity of us all. So the hyphal causative form of paga in the context of intercession means the Lord set his servant as the intercessor who lifts up and carries the people's iniquities before him. So this is one. So this is sort of going further with the priestly motif, in the sense that we're looking at an intercessory action and a function, which is what a priest does. Now, there is another way to take this And there's maybe a couple English translations that pick up on the semantic use of this term paga. It which gets translated as the Lord caused our iniquities to strike him. And this comes from a sense of where the verb is talking about causing to meet, where causing two things to meet. And when if we're talking about a servant and iniquities, and we bring in what we already understand about this passage up until now, especially in 5, where it describes the people bruising and wounding the servant from their iniquities, from their transgressions. It would seem a very valid and correct way of reading the end of verse 6 as the Lord caused our iniquities to strike him. The LXX renders it in this way: the Lord has delivered him up on account of our transgressions, or delivered over. It's sort of this language of the Lord, just giving him over to our transgressions. And what this brings to mind, I mean, my mind goes to a number of different places here, but just being honest, what this brings to mind is the oracle in Zechariah, where God says to the people, "Strike the shepherd, and the people will scatter." And this is in the context of understanding in this passage in Zechariah, what's already been discussed is the fact that the people have striked out against and murdered the prophets or previous shepherds. So it's sort of God knows what's in the hearts of the people, and God nonetheless decides to deliver over the shepherd that he has raised up to them. And this is sort of the backdrop to why in the Gospels, when like in Matthew and also in John chapter 12, it figures prominently there. When Jesus is describing, when he's predicting the way he's going to die to his disciples, he says, "The Son of Man will be handed over, will be delivered over." That's the same verb that's here in the Septuagint version of verse 6. So really, the Lord is delivering the servant over. He's causing the iniquities to strike him. That's what I lean towards. I mean, it's possible to render it in the sense of the servant coming between and interceding, but I fundamentally I think the best rendering is to view it in terms of what we already see in verse 5, is that the servant is being handed over and the people are striking him. And this is again meant to wake the people up to realize they've gone so far astray that they've struck the servant who is meant to bring healing. So let's see. Now moving on to stanza 4, we're going to kind of go put 4 and 5 together. Stanza 4, which is verses 7 through 9, describes the servant's silence and unjust death. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. He did not open his mouth. This is the posture of the innocent one who entrusts himself to God's vindication rather than retaliating against his persecutors. Verse 9 notes that he was assigned a grave with the wicked, even though he had done no violence and no deceit was in his mouth. This is the culmination of the injustice. The innocent servant is treated as a criminal. Again, this is in verse 9. My back up here. Yeah. verse 9. Actually, we could really talk about verse 8 first. It's from oppression and judgment he was taken away, or by oppression and judgment he was taken away. So this is describing inherently an injustice, and of this one being cut off from the land of the living, and stricken from their transgressions. There's that same preposition again, from, not for. Yeah, so stanza 5, this is a critical one. Verses 10 through 12, this is the divine vindication. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief, is verse 10. Or, well, we go on to the next line. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, or an offering for sin, as the Septuagint version puts it. This verse, read through a PSA lens, becomes, it pleased God to punish Jesus instead of us. But the verb, again, this is the same verb in verse 5, daka, as I analyzed above, means to humble, to make contrite, to bring low. And the guilt offering, asham, framing does not require a penal reading. The asham in Leviticus is not primarily about receiving punishment. It is about making restoration. God's pleasure in crushing the servant is the pleasure of the refiner who tests gold in the furnace. A direct echo of Wisdom 3:6, which the apostolic tradition drew on extensively. The Father was perfecting his priest through the humiliation of unjust suffering. And it might be good for me to even bring up Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 3. Let's go to chapter 3. So this is speaking about the life of the righteous before God. The souls of the righteous are in the hand of God. This is verse 1. And no torment will ever touch them. In the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died, and their departure was thought to be a disaster, and their going from us to be their destruction. But they are at peace. There's that idea of peace being the fruit of the righteous life. For though in the sight of others it seemed they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. Having been disciplined a little, that's the same Greek verb, the verbal form of the noun discipline that renders the Hebrew masar. Having been disciplined a little, they will receive great good, because God tested them and found them worthy of himself. Like gold in the furnace, he tried them, and like a sacrificial burnt offering, he accepted them. In the time of their visitation, they will shine forth and will run like sparks through the stubble. They will govern nations and rule over peoples, and the Lord will reign over them forever. So if you're paying attention to that, and you have Isaiah 53 in your mind, I mean, you should see a direct one-for-one correlation there. Many people have not made that connection, but what Isaiah 53, 4 and 5 make sort of poetically, this wisdom literature in Wisdom of Solomon chapter 3 is making very explicit. I mean, it's very explicit, very clear there, that the PSA reading of this, of the servant taking the penalty and being punished by God, that is exactly what the wisdom literature says is the outlook of the foolish person who does not know God, who does not walk with God. So that I want to, without making this an attack of people on people who are PSA proponents, this is an attack on, not an attack on people. This is an attack on against the PSA framework, the PSA lens. Think about what it causes you to do. this lens causes you to agree with the foolish person, to agree with those who persecuted and that they thought that they were doing God's work, that they were that this person was being punished by God. No, you need to throw PSA out the door, throw it in the trash where it belongs, because we are not to be foolish people. We're to be wise and understand the truth of the matter. And so I'm presenting you the truth of the matter. That Wisdom of Solomon is a great companion to read to understand the correct frame of reference of both Isaiah 53 and the crucifixion narratives of the Gospels. So I hope that you will you will start to read those two side by side and draw the correct connections. So verse 10 continues, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. This is resurrection language. The servant who is put to death sees offspring and prolongs his days. This is an impossibility unless God restores his life. And verse 11 gives the result. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. The servant's knowledge, his teaching and wisdom is what makes many righteous. Again, this is why the Aramaic Targum in verse 5 wraps it up with, and by obedience to his instruction, our sins, our transgressions will be forgiven. And he bears their iniquities in the intercessory priestly sense. He lifts them before the Father to be cleansed and removed. So the absence of penal and legal language throughout this song is quite remarkable. God's anger is never mentioned. God's wrath is nowhere invoked. There is no language of legal penalty, judicial debt, or punishment being transferred. What there is throughout is the language of suffering and humiliation caused by the people's rebellion, of a servant who remained faithful through that suffering, of intercession and purification, and of God's vindication and exaltation of the servant who trusted him. Isaiah 53 is a song about the messianic high priest who completes Israel's vocation by succeeding where Israel failed. It is not a proof text for penal substitution. Again, if you are joining in the chat, let me know if you have any questions up to this point. If there's anything that you see I haven't covered, I'd be happy to address that at some point. And we are going to have an opportunity to open this up for discussion. I'll pin a link to join me in the stage. If you agree or disagree or want to share some thoughts, I'd be happy to have a discussion. But again, if you have questions, particular things that I haven't addressed, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll see if I can address them. One thing that was so one question that I didn't get to address in part one was there was a question on whether the crush in verse 10 where it says it pleased the Lord to crush him, he has put him to grief. There's a question of whether that's the same verb that's in Genesis 3:15, I think it is, in reference to the oracle about, or the prophecy about the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. It's not the same verb there. I think the verb there in Genesis 3:15 is something like shuf or something like that. it's not the same. It's not really the same semantic range. So no, there. I don't see really any connection there. But again, dacha in verse 10 and verse 5 is primarily its primary use is in reference to humility, contriteness. All right, so now we're going to move into let's see. Lactantius, but it's irrational to make the claims you're making. Yeah, I mean, feel free to point out any claim that you're referring to, and if there's like I said, there'll be opportunity. I definitely invite you to come up after I'm done with the presentation. We can have a cordial discussion. I'm not one who is given to cross-examining or interrogating guests. I like having discussions and sort of parsing out views. So I'd be happy to have you join if you're still available at that time at the end of the presentation. Yeah, I do not take it that way. I'm very thick-skinned, and I actually like having conversations with people who disagree. So, no hurt feelings there, brother. Yeah, it's all good. So we're going to move into talking about the Passover. This is another passage that often gets foisted as a proof text for penal substitution. Let's see. So, the standard PSA reading of the Passover goes something like this. The death angel was coming to strike all the firstborn sons, including Israel's. The lamb was killed as a substitute so that its death would stand in for the death of Israel's firstborn sons. The blood on the doorpost appeased the death angel by demonstrating that a substitute had already died, and this prefigures Christ dying as our substitute so that God's wrath passes over us. This reading has serious problems. They are not minor. First, the death angel was not sent to strike Israel at all. Exodus 12 is explicit. The destroyer came against Egypt, against Pharaoh and his people. Israel was never in the path of that judgment. The dynamic of the Passover is not that all are under the same sentence and one party must supply a substitute to take the blow. The dynamic is that God is redeeming his firstborn son, Israel, from the oppressive powers of Egypt by a mighty act of deliverance. Second, the language of substitution is entirely absent from the Passover narrative. The lamb was not described as dying in the place of anyone. It was slaughtered for two specific purposes: to provide its blood to mark the doorposts and to supply the meat for the fellowship meal with the Lord. Now, the lamb in this Passover event and in the subsequent memorials, this is a particular type of offering. It's called a shalamim, peace offering, well-being offering. This is not a sin offering. A sin offering involves goats. This is a lamb. And there's no temple purification or tabernacle or sanctuary purification rite going on. So this isn't having anything to do with appeasing God for sins or removing wrath or anything like that. A well-being offering is a communion meal with the God that you're offering it. You're basically drawing near and you're having communion with God. You're having a meal. So you should really think of barbecue when you think of this. The blood is marking the doorpost to show that this household belongs to Israel. Well, think of it. The angel, the destroyer, was coming to strike Egypt. So if it sees a house with a doorpost that's marked with blood, that tells the destroyer, this is not Egypt. This is a household that belongs to God. That's what the blood is doing. It's a marking of covenant. It marks out the covenant people. So um uh yeah, so God was the blood is a sign of ownership, is the point that I'm making. God was marking out his people, laying claim to them, and setting them apart from Egypt. This is explicit in the language of chapter 11 and 12. It says that I will make a distinction between my people, Israel, and the people of Egypt. Well, how is he going to make that distinction? Well, he gives instructions. This is how you to mark yourselves out as Israel, is you put blood of the well-being offering on your doorposts. That shows that you are mine. You belong to me. You're not Egypt, you're Israel. So that's how he makes the distinction. So we should derive the meaning of these things from the text itself and not try to sense make or make our own meaning out of it. The text does that quite well itself. The meal was a fellowship meal. That's what a shalamim is, a shared table with the Lord who was redeeming them. Neither of these functions is substitutionary in any sense. Third, Exodus 13, immediately following the Passover, gives us a vital piece of contextual evidence. God commands Israel to redeem all their firstborn sons. If the Passover lamb had already served as a substitute death in the place of the firstborn sons, why would any further redemption or ransom, if we're to use that language, be required? The lamb's death would have settled the matter, but it hadn't, because that was never what the lamb was for. Rather, God has just ransomed and claimed his firstborn son, Israel, and he is now calling Israel to participate in his own nature as a ransoming, redemptive God by ransoming their own firstborns. So this is participatory ritual. It's to remind Israel that God had ransomed them out of destruction and oppression with an outstretched arm. And so they are to participate with God in his own nature as a people who ransom. So they go through this ritual. What the Passover actually depicts is a ransom and redemption. The Exodus event. Whatever you think of what ransom means, we understand that ransom is not a penal substitution. Otherwise, it would just use that language. Ransom language is redemption. It's God is acquiring possession of a people out of a place of oppression and destruction. And so that's what the Hebrew and the underlying Greek words mean in the New Testament when it talks of ransom, acquiring. God is acquiring a people. He's possessing them. So he is rescuing and redeeming his people from the oppressive powers that had enslaved them. The blood is not a penal token. It is a mark of God's claim and the seal of his covenant faithfulness. And the fellowship meal is not a post-punishment celebration. It is a covenant meal, the very act of belonging to and eating with the God who has redeemed you. The typological connection to Jesus, properly understood, flows naturally from this. Jesus is the Passover lamb, not because he died as a punitive substitute in our place, but because through his blood, his life, God redeems his people from the enslaving powers of sin and death. The blood of Jesus marks us out as God's own possession. The fellowship meal instituted by Jesus at the Last Supper, specifically in the context of Passover, is a covenant meal that seals our belonging to him who has redeemed us. And just as the Passover ransom delivered Israel from Egypt's bondage, so Jesus' blood delivers us from the bondage of sin and death not by satisfying God's wrath with a substitute's punishment, but by the power of his indestructible life, breaking the chains of our captivity. Paul's language in 1 Corinthians 5:7, Christ, quote, Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed, is drawing on this liberation and covenant marking typology, not on a substitutionary penalty typology. The Passover is about ransom and redemption, about God claiming and delivering his people, about the fellowship of the delivered with the deliverer. PSA has overlaid a punitive substitution narrative onto this event that the text simply does not support. And so the last part I want to wrap this presentation up with is recovering Jesus's priesthood. Perhaps the deepest shortcoming of the PSA framework is what it makes the resurrection and high priestly ministry of Jesus into. When PSA reduces the atonement to a single moment, the cross, and reduces the mechanism to a single transaction, God punishing his son in our place, it effectively empties out the rich, active, ongoing priesthood of Jesus that the New Testament, and especially the letter to the Hebrews, places at the very center of the gospel. The Levitical high priest was not simply an animal killer. His primary function was intercessory. He stood before God for the sake of the people, bearing their burdens, lifting their iniquities, interceding for their cleansing and restoration. The Day of Atonement ritual encapsulates this. The high priest entered the holy place, made purification for the sanctuary and the people, and then sent the iniquities of the people away into the wilderness on the scapegoat. The entire process was one of intercession, purification, and removal. The high priest made atonement for all Israel, but only those who humbled themselves and drew near received the benefit of it. Those who rejected it and rebelled found it a word of condemnation rather than cleansing. Likewise, Jesus the high priest makes intercession for all humanity, but only those who humble themselves and draw near to him through faith and obedience are beneficiaries of that intercession. This is why the New Testament consistently frames the reception of atonement in terms of drawing near, of faith, of obedience to his words, not merely it's not a forensic status change accomplished at a single point in history. The letter to the Hebrews builds its entire argument around this priestly framework. Jesus is not presented as a defendant who accepts a punishment on our behalf. He is presented as the ultimate high priest who, having been perfected through suffering and obedience, entered the heavenly sanctuary to provide for the cleansing of the conscience and the soul. So again, the deficiency of penal substitution, and I want to make this clear, is that it locates both the act and the mechanism of atonement specifically at the cross, making the resurrection really just sort of an afterthought. Like, well, it just means that God accepted that ultimate payment for the sins of the people, so to speak. But if you follow the actual language of Hebrews, how it draws on the Levitical priesthood and the purification rites and all those things, the atonement did not happen at the cross. The cross had nothing to do with atonement. Atonement is something very specific and univocal in both testaments. It's the act of a high priest in the sanctuary of purifying and cleansing both the sacred space and people, whereas the blood of animals and goats and bulls was for the cleansing of flesh. Jesus entered the heavenly sanctuary not with blood of bulls and goats, but by his indestructible life. And that life is now what cleanses the soul. And so for those who draw near in faith, we have our consciences cleansed from dead works. And so that's And John and the Apostle John in 1 John 1:8 makes it clear that this is how it's done. We come before him, we confess our sins. He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So there's that cleansing, purifying language. That's his role. And as I laid out, kafar, to make atonement, is fundamentally a cleansing act. So the cleansing act, the atonement, happens in the heavenly sanctuary post-resurrection, post-ascension. It does not happen at the cross, because the cross is not an atoning event. So here's where the connection to Isaiah 53 becomes decisive. The verb paga in its hyphal form in verses 6 and 12, which I discussed in the previous section, means to make intercession for. The intercessory function of the servant is the climactic note of the entire song. All the bearing, the carrying, the being wounded and crushed, all of it is in the service of his now present intercession. He is doing what the high priest does, lifting the iniquities of the people before the Lord, so that through his righteous obedience and the purification his life effects, those iniquities will be removed. Hebrews also draws attention to the permanence and effectiveness of Jesus' priesthood compared to the Levitical priesthood. The Levitical priests were many because death prevented them from continuing in office. Jesus, because he lives forever, holds his priesthood permanently and is therefore able to save completely those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Lives to make intercession for them. A dead person on a cross cannot make atonement, but a living high priest can make atonement. So that's what this is all about. PSA, though it purports to be an atonement theory, completely makes it impossible for atonement on their view, because a dead person does not make atonement. So this has profound implications for how we understand phrases like, quote, the blood of Christ cleanses us. The blood is not a historical substance from a first century body which was hung on a cross. It is the ongoing life of the risen, ascended Jesus presented before the Father in the heavenly sanctuary. When Hebrews says his blood speaks a better word, it is describing something active and present. His life, indestructible and ever living, is the cleansing agent that continually purifies those who draw near in faith. This is why John 1:7 says, the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us. Present tense, continuous action. PSA, by contrast, tends to reduce Jesus' blood to a historical transaction with legal effects. A payment made, a penalty absorbed, and a debt paid. This is impoverished compared to the New Testament picture, and it misses the entire active, priestly, intercessory dimension of what Jesus is doing right now on our behalf. Let's see. Tony says, PSA makes Yahweh an unrighteous judge. It goes directly against Deuteronomy 24:16 and Exodus 18:19 through 26. Yes, it does. And welcome, Tony. I'm glad I saw you earlier in the live stream. Again, sorry, everybody, for the botched up beginning of the stream. That was beyond my control, a bunch of technical difficulties. But I hope things have cleared up since then. So, yeah, there is no sense of justice that would make it okay for a judge to condemn a righteous person in the place of guilty people. Even if that righteous person was willing to suffer, quote unquote, the punishment that was due to the guilty person, that would still be a mishandling of justice, according to God's own law. Yeah, and people can look up those passages: Deuteronomy 24:16, Ezekiel 18:19 through 26, and those should definitely help speak for themselves. Yeah, thanks for the comment, Tony. So I also want to note the connection between Jesus' priesthood and the concept of representative as opposed to substitutive. PSA insists on a substitutionary model, Jesus doing for us what we could not do for ourselves, in our place, absorbing a punishment we deserved. But the biblical picture is one of representative identification. Jesus takes up the human vocation, the vocation Israel failed to fulfill, to be a kingdom of priests, mediating God's blessing to the nations and offering up the obedience and worship of all creation to God. He succeeds where Israel failed. He stands as the faithful representative of the whole human family before God, and through his obedience and priestly ministry draws all who are united to him in his death and resurrection into his own purification and life. This is not substitution, it is incorporation. We don't get the benefits because a transaction was made outside of us. We get the benefits by being drawn into him, into his obedience, his life, his death, and his resurrection. This is why the New Testament consistently describes salvation not in terms of forensic status change, but in terms of being in Christ, being joined to him, obeying him, walking in his ways. The eternal salvation Jesus brings comes to all who obey him, Hebrews 5:9. The Targum rendering of Isaiah 53:5, by our devotion to his words, our transgressions shall be forgiven us, captures exactly this. The servant's teaching becomes the pathway of purification for those who unite themselves to it. So this is priestly representative intercessory framework. Jesus is not a punitive substitute who exhausted divine wrath on a cross so that forensically justified sinners could go on sinning without eternal consequence. He is the faithful high priest who, having been perfected through suffering, draws all who follow him into the same obedience, purification, and life that he himself embodies. His priesthood is not a transaction to be credited to our account. It is a living reality into which we are called to enter. So let's wrap this up. PSA is a theory that that was developed outside the biblical framework and then read back into it. Once you commit to starting with kafar, the actual Hebrew word, and following where it leads, the entire PSA structure collapses. Atonement is purification, not penal payment. Blood is life, not death. The atonement happens in the holy place, not on a cross. The prepositions mean and hooper do not say what PSA needs them to say. Isaiah 53 presents a representative intercessory high priest, not a punitive substitute. The Passover is a ransom redemption, not a substitutionary sacrifice. And Jesus' priesthood is an active, ongoing reality of intercession and cleansing life, not a historical transaction. So that really concludes. Let's bring this back up. Let's see if this will work now. All right, so what I'm going to do is, at this point, is I'm going to go ahead and post the link to join me in the studio. And for anybody who wants to come up and discuss anything related to what I've presented here, I'd be happy to host you. So that should be coming on to the chat soon. Yeah, there's the link. Let's see. Sorry, I missed your comment here, Lactantius. If you're still here, I think denying PSA is tantamount to denying the gospel itself, since they are directly parallel. Just like denying Jesus is God is to deny the Trinity. Um, it, it, I totally I get what you're saying. I understand. That I mean, it's interesting. Penal substitutionary atonement proponents seem to be the only ones who try to link their atonement theory to the gospel itself. And I think my initial thought is, and again, we can talk about it if you are willing to come up. I um, I think there's a reason for that. Is that penal substitution is the only theory of atonement that actually isn't biblical, and so you have to try to link it to the gospel itself in order to sort of emotionally uh, uh, bully people into accepting it or maintaining it if they do accept it. I just think it's a moralistic tactic. It's not something that's germane to the Bible. There's no Jesus himself never talks about his penal substitution at all in any of the Gospels. It's nowhere in the book of Acts when all the apostles are gospeling. It's not mentioned once. So it's just it's very difficult to maintain that argument that you're making. Um, I don't envy anybody who tries to argue that. They have a very uphill battle to do. That I'm just being honest with that. Tony says, if the Father poured out his wrath on Yeshua, then he did it to himself, since he was in Yeshua. That's 1 Corinthians 5:19. Yeah, reconciling the world to himself. Yeah, that it, and especially when you combine this PSA framework with and try to make it work with Trinity doctrine, it uh, it gets into all sorts of weird messiness, and this is one example. As much no matter how hard you try to make the members of the Trinity working all together in one accord with penal substitution, you end up with things like this that you have to then try to work through. There's just too many there's too many difficulties. You're either going to end up with Nestorianism. You're dividing Jesus into two persons, or you're going to end up with Jesus didn't actually die. So pick your poison. Let's see. Just trying to see if anybody else is going to be if anybody else wants to jump in to the discussion. Like I said, the link to join me here in the studio is in the chat. Feel free to click that if you want to come on in. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, you, father daughter, you said you mentioned Gentry's work earlier. Where do you go to access his works? Yeah. So let me actually. A great question. Let me pull up. I can post a link in the chat for you to you can download actually a PDF of it. He has it available through PDF. So let me get that. So I just posted a link there, father daughter, to the chat. That takes you to a web page, and you can just once there, you can download PDF there, and it'll. It's called the title of his work is the Atonement, and is Isaiah's fourth servant song. And let me know in the let me know if that link doesn't work, or it doesn't take you to the right place, or whatever. Tony says, have you noticed how Israel is described in Isaiah 1 4 through 6 is exactly what the servant suffered in chapter 53 to heal Israel? Um, I I might have made that connection before. I'll have to revisit it. That's a yeah. I'm not too familiar um with that. Let's see. You said Isaiah 1 4 through 6. Alas, O sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who act corruptly. They have forsaken the Lord, they have despised the Holy One of Israel, and turned their backs on him. Why do you want more beatings? Why do you keep rebelling? Your head has a massive wound, and your whole heart is afflicted. From the sole of your feet to the top of your head, there is no soundness, only wounds and welts and festering sores, neither cleansed nor bandaged nor soothed with oil. Yeah, that actually does. Interesting. Yeah. Um, the oh, what's interesting is that what's going through my head right now as I read that is a passage in the Talmud. Um, I man, it's like Sanhedrin. Uh, man, which one is that? I'll have to search up again, but uh, there's a discussion among the rabbis about how they will know, um, how they will be able to recognize the Messiah when he comes. And it describes him in this lowly state. He's sort of in an infirmary or this place, gathering of a bunch of sick people, and they're stricken and sick, and they have sores on their body. And the Messiah is pictured as one who is covered with sores, and his sores have dressings on them. They've been dressed, but there's this curious discussion about whether he removes the dressings all at once or one at a time. And I forget the exact context of that discussion, but one of the rabbis concludes, actually he removes his dressings from his wounds one at a time. And then it says the reason being is because he has to be ready at a moment's notice for the redemption of Israel. And I don't claim to fully understand what's going on there, but that discussion always stuck out to me. And this passage about in Isaiah 1 sort of really brought it to mind, because it's discussing the people covered from head to toe with sores. And what it brings to mind is the idea that the Messiah comes into the situation as one who is suffering along with Israel. And yet, when he provides redemption, it brings healing to himself, and he's able to heal Israel. Sort of show Israel the way to healing is sort of what I get from that. And there's something profound going on there, because Isaiah 53, it is about Israel. It's about her Messiah, but Israel has always been bound up in the vocation and the identity of Messiah. The Messiah is Israel, and Israel is, in some sense, the prototype for Messiah, because they're meant to be a light to the world. Messiah is the light of the world, and he calls those who follow him to be a light of the world. And Israel had become enmeshed in the problem that they were meant to redeem the nations out of. They rebelled, and they became also part of the problem. They didn't listen to God's instruction. That's Isaiah 26. It says that when we are under God's discipline, we didn't heed it. We tried to give birth, but it became, in other words, we tried to bear fruit for life for the nations, but all we could bear fruit was wind. And so the nations could not come to life because Israel was not fulfilling its vocation, its calling. But then one comes and does fulfill it, in order to sort of reboot everything and as the faithful Israelite. And so Israel could then follow in the footsteps of Messiah, unite themselves to him, and obey his instructions, and walk, return to the Lord, and walk in the way of the Lord. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Of that's there's a lot there. There's a lot of deepness there to be mined. Hmm. Again, if you're just tuning in or have been here for a while, again, I invite you to click the link that I provided in the chat to come on and join me in the studio, and we could have a discussion. Let me make sure that link is pinned. There we go. All right. So, um, if nobody else is going to comment or have a question, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Again, with Isaiah 53, which was the bulk of what we spent the time here this evening on. I hope you have an opportunity go back and see part one. Some of what I covered in terms of the verb dacha, crushed. I cover that also in a couple other episodes. If you look up on my channel, Refining Exegetics episodes 7 and 10, those are part one and part two, titled The Lord, it was Lord's Will to Crush PSA. Um, provocative title, I know, yeah. But I cover that verb dacha, crushed in detail, and also address some pushback that I received on my treatment of that verb. So again, episodes 7 and 10, I'll put those down in the description after I'm done here. They cover that. I have a lot of material on atonement and a bit on Isaiah 53 that I cover in bits and pieces. So definitely check those episodes out. Again, what I've been doing, I have not found any substantial treatment of the actual Hebrew text in verses 5 and 10 particularly. It seems like every commentator focuses a lot on everything before and after that, but when it gets to the prepositions in verse 5 and 8 and such, it seems like no one pays any attention to any of that. They just gloss over the prepositions and they just grant the English rendering. And again, what I do that I haven't seen anybody else do, and I'm not this really is I really do want to encourage my fellow brothers and sisters who do not hold to penal substitution. I want to encourage you that in your treatment of passages like Isaiah 53, don't just take the English renderings for granted and then try to say, well, let's try to read this in a non-PSA way. My exhortation is no, go deeper than that. Go to the actual language, learn how to study and read these words. These prepositions mean things. They have usage. They have spatial relations, and your English translations do not reflect that. And so, I hope that you will take that for what it is my encouragement to you to refine your exegetical approach and to dig deeper into the text. So I hope I hope this helps people to be able to use those tools to search at that deeper level. Father Daughter says, thanks for your heart and sharing a different perspective. You set a good example of how to present ideas others may not agree with. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate the comment there and the encouragement. Thank you for tuning in and staying through all the technical difficulties. All right. Just a quick announcement. As much as I've spent on Isaiah 53 here, I have upcoming on this channel a great mega stream. I'm going to call it a mega stream on Isaiah 53, where myself and my good friend Spencer Owen from the Trauma Informed Church Kid podcast, he and I have spent a considerable amount of years trying to understand Isaiah 53 and glean as much data as we can on how to read it, how to interpret it. He's done a lot of work on it. You might be able to find some of his work on by going to his YouTube channel, again, Trauma Informed Church Kid. And I'll put a link in the description for that. But on June 7th, Sunday, June 7th, we're going to be doing a live stream, he and I together, and we're going to be bringing the greatest lineup of witnesses about Isaiah 53 that probably anybody has ever done. I mean, it's going to be pretty exhaustive. We're going to have a good time. And so I hope you can join me for that. Again, that's going to be June 7th. And look for the announcement of that on my channel, and for the live stream to be posted so that you could get that notification. If you've liked this live stream, please give it a like, leave a comment, and if you definitely interested in more content in regards to atonement, just subscribe to my channel. I'm always this is an ongoing thing that I speak a lot on, that I present a lot on, and like to have conversations with people about. So with that said, bless you all tonight. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and happy Memorial Day to you. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. Thank you for joining me tonight. Good night. Hey folks, if you enjoyed this episode and the content, please like the video and leave a comment below, and definitely subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can be sure to catch more content like this as it comes. Until next time, think deep.